From our studio in New York, Bill Moyers.
Welcome to the Journal. Here with me now are two partners of Triglyceride Investments, a private equity fund that recently announced its intention of combining the assets of all the hedge funds on Wall Street in order to bring under a single canopy of ownership every media outlet in America. Their prospectus contends that the handful of big media companies that control most of what you see, hear, and read cannot possibly produce maximum return on investments as long as each has to field its own army of lobbyists in Washington. If only one holding company instead of 4 or 5 controlled all the country's radio and television stations and all of its cable, newspaper, and internet outlets, eliminating the need for the competitive purchase of politicians, the savings on campaign contributions alone would increase the bottom line tenfold. Not the least of their argument is that since our present media system and Washington so closely mirror each other's interests, it could even be possible to close down the government altogether and have the country run by Wall Street, saving huge sums of money now spent on perpetuating an impression to the contrary. Joining me are Andy Bickelbaum, the chairman of Triglyceride Investments, and his partner, Mike Bonanno, chief executive of their offshore subsidiary, Teetsy Media, Inc., with headquarters in the Marianas Islands. Welcome to the Journal.
Thank you.
Let me ask you, is it true that when you go public, you intend to include NPR and PBS in your IPO?
Well, yes. Absolutely.
We're looking at creating entertainment that would, in a sense, breed wealth. We're interested in making enough money because it's through the making of money that we can improve society.
So you really see a silver lining in media conglomeration?
This is not just a silver lining. The coat is reversible. It's literally going to be a silver jacket.
Well, you know, a lot of us are concerned that already just a handful of big media companies have driven everything to the bottom. I mean, what makes you think one big holding company could do any better or worse?
Well, if you think about the bottom of the barrel metaphor, you know, everybody knows that the sweetest apples are at the bottom. And under optimal conditions, in fact, you get the weight of the top apples, even creating minor lesions in the skin of the apples at the bottom, and thereby allowing the infiltration of productive bacteria, which can even lead to the production of brandy. And who doesn't like brandy? If you take the apples and spread them over a field, essentially what you end up with is a bunch of rabbits with the runs. And what's the interest of that?
Consolidation is going to benefit you, Bill. I mean, that's something that you're going to have to realize, that you, as a consumer, are going to have more channels available. We'll have more money to be able to produce more programming that you'll like, and it will serve your needs better.
Even with your reduced income.
Look, enough's enough. I'm often telling my audience on this program that I'm not kidding when I report some absurdity, but I have been kidding these past few moments, and I have to level with my audience. You're not representatives of Triglyceride Investments. You don't own Teetsy Media. Who are you really?
My name is Mike Bonanno, and we are with a group called the Yes Men.
And I'm Andy Bickelbaum, and I really am also with the Yes Men.
Andy.
Yes, they're the Yes Men, and they serve up satirical humor laced with lunacy to call the media's attention to serious issues. This was their first subversive film, released 3 years ago.
The reality is that we already treat people in the third world far worse than we treat our domestic animals.
Followed by this book, and another film is now in the works. It all started some years ago when they set up a parody of the World Trade Organization's website. Somebody mistook it for the real thing, and they got a serious invitation to speak as experts at an international conference in Austria.
We prepared this absurd speech talking about how we must eliminate the siesta, privatize voting, and this sort of thing. And we fully expected to get kicked out or perhaps arrested. We had no idea.
What happened?
Nothing. Nothing happened.
They listened to you?
They listened.
They believed you?
They believed us. They asked questions. And then we left. We had lunch with them afterwards.
That was the biggest surprise from that first experience. You know, we thought that saying that we wanted to open a free market and democracy by allowing people to sell their votes to the highest bidder would make people angry. But it didn't. They just accepted it because it kept within the logic of the thinking in that room.
What do you mean, in the logic?
Well, I mean, they were talking at that conference about international trade law and the importance of breaking down trade barriers and the importance of free markets. And so when we said, we have a giant free market. It's called democracy, and the only problem is that corporations can't buy and sell votes. They said, you're right, great idea, let's implement it, let's figure out how to do it, and they just accepted it, and that's what I mean. It stayed within that logic.
Does this make you cynical?
Well,
It makes us very worried.
yeah.
And we hope that the people who see us doing these crazy things get worried too. That's why we do it.
Here's a case study of how they do it. Last spring, the Yes Men set up another fake website called HalliburtonContracts.com. They were fishing, and they got a bite. Organizers for an insurance conference on catastrophic loss took them as representatives of the giant energy services firm and asked them to make a presentation about how to address global climate change.
I'm Northrop Goody. I'm here with Halliburton with Fred.
Mike Bonanno posed as Dr. Northrop Goody, the head of Halliburton's Emergency Products Development Unit. Andy Bickelbaum spoke as Fred Wolf, also from Halliburton.
Consider the Black Plague. This was an unspeakably rotten event, of course, in which 1/3 of Europe's population died in great agony. Yet without it, without the Black Plague, the old business models of Europe would never have been overturned by the entrepreneurs of the Renaissance. And what would the world be without the Mona Lisa?
After a short presentation of world catastrophes, they asked for volunteers from the audience to demonstrate a new product that could help prevent ill effects from climate change. They called it Survivaball. The audience bought it.
We want something that's going to be able to save a human being no matter what Mother Nature throws at him. And so this is the answer. It's 3 easy steps for deployment: suiting up, inflating, and of course launching. Launching out of a building. And we have an artist's rendition of what it might be like in Houston when we launch our Survivaballs. They're going to be able to go underwater, rated at 50 feet. They can be used in any condition. It doesn't matter whether you're in a landslide in California or even in the Arctic, and of course any other conditions, whether it's tsunamis or tornadoes. The Survivaball is designed to withstand.
The audience believed you?
Yeah, unfortunately, maybe the audience of intelligent people accepted it and understood it to be just business as usual.
When did they catch on?
They didn't.
They didn't. One guy actually asked if this ball could be applied to the terrorist threat. He immediately saw that as a possibility. And afterwards, we had a conversation with the 2 organizers and the 2 guys who had been in the ball. And they suggested that perhaps we might want to make it more comfortable, and also they had a problem with the price, but came to the conclusion that the people who needed it could afford it.
What were you trying to prove to yourselves, if not to them?
The main point of this was to drive home just how grave the situation is and who really stands to benefit from it. It's disproportionately the poor who suffer, and the rich can always protect themselves. So this was sort of a symbol of that.
You went to a conference in Europe and suggested that the siesta in Spain be made illegal because it interferes with work?
Well, that was actually about the idea of harmonization, global harmonization of business practices. There was at the time, strangely enough, something on the Italian books to outlaw the long lunch in Italy. This was a Berlusconi idea. He thought it was great.
The Prime Minister, yeah.
Yeah, he thought he could synchronize, with the rest of Europe, and so if they just didn't take as long a lunch in Italy, things would be fine. So he outlawed it. The same thing actually happened with Fox's government in Mexico. They outlawed the siesta in government offices during the same time. We thought we were making a really strange satire about this idea of harmonization, about people's worry that cultural traditions were going to be ended by the policies of the WTO, and yet it turned out that these things were actually being legislated by governments around the world.
You can't get too absurd, can you?
You can't.
In this world.
And I think that this is really the point, is that as long as we are deferring all of our responsibilities to a marketplace to make the decision, we're going to be in trouble, and we're going to keep heading down these paths that are leading us on the course toward destruction.
Is what you do legal?
Yeah.
We think it is.
Absolutely. So we've never had anybody who could tell us that it wasn't.
Has anybody tried to?
Yes.
Who?
Well, about a month ago, we spoke at a giant oil conference in Calgary, Alberta, as Exxon. And
Representing Exxon?
Representing Exxon, yeah. And we told it was a conference with 20,000 attendees. Our event was the keynote luncheon, which was hyped by the organizers as a very important event.
Who invited you?
The organizers of the conference. Go Expo, it was called.
Go Expo. But how did they know about you?
They, same as anybody, they stumbled on our website and
You're kidding. And they wrote you a letter or called you?
An email, yeah.
Don't they do vetting? Don't they do due diligence?
Apparently not. You know, they send out many, many emails to many people, and they just sent one out to us, inviting us to come present at the conference or come have a presence there. And we said, great, yeah, we'll definitely come and we'll do a lot for you.
And here's what they did. Bickelbaum was Shepherd Wolf of the National Petroleum Council. That's a real organization.
Without oil, we would not have food. Without oil, we would not be able to bring that food to our tables. Without oil, at least 4 billion people would starve, and even those left would have a very hard time of it. But I'm not here today to pat us all on the back. I'm here to speak of Plan Bs. What we really need is something as plentiful as petroleum, but much less dependent on infrastructure. Or something as useful as whales, but infinitely more abundant.
Bonanno posed as Florian Ossenberg, representing ExxonMobil.
As you can see, I'm holding in my hand a candle. Right now, there are people fanning out.
The audience listened intently as the Yes Men outlined a new product to replace fossil fuels. They called it Vivolium.
These candles are made of Vivolium.
You were describing technology rendering human flesh into this new product called Vivolium.
In a worst case scenario, of course, climate change could lead to enormous catastrophes, which might interrupt the flow of oil. And that would be a tragedy. So we have to be ready with a new source of oil, and that's, of course, the many millions or even more people that will die. We can render them into Vivolium.
We handed out candles to the audience, lit candles that were in the shape of a man. And they had human hair in them, incidentally, so it smelled really bad in the room. And we showed a video of the guy who gave his life for the Vivolium product.
Reggie was willing to make that sacrifice for the betterment of humanity. So for that, we all salute him.
I think I'd like to be a candle.
By the end of the video that they saw, they understood that they were holding a little part of that janitor. So
They didn't catch on?
well, some of them did.
Because they started, about halfway through the video when they began realizing that they were actually holding this burning man in their hands. They started trying to put it in glasses, and they really didn't want to touch it anymore. This time there were actually a few people in the audience who recognized Andy, probably because our film was on Showtime not so long ago, and they started to react. Conference organizers were kind of freaking out and trying to figure out how they could shut it down. But once something like that is rolling, too, it's hard to stop it without some degree of embarrassment.
This was not the presentation we had anticipated. Please enjoy the rest of your meal.
When I heard about that, read about it, and then watched it, I thought of that marvelous passage from the great satirist Jonathan Swift, the English satirist a couple of centuries ago. He said, "I've been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance in London that a young, healthy child, well nursed, is at a year old a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled." He was, of course, trying to mock the various efforts to deal with malnutrition at that time, and he was suggesting, why don't we eat ourselves? But England took him seriously. It was amazing.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's the strength in it, because what was going on at that time, of course, was the Irish potato famine. And, what the English essentially were saying to the Irish was, go ahead and eat your babies, because there was enough food in Ireland, but the cash crops were still being exported to England and elsewhere. I mean, and that's the crux of the issue. That's what he was satirizing, the fact that money was dictating whether or not people got food in Ireland at that time.
And in this case, we just felt absolutely compelled to make the audience realize what we were doing, and that's why we had them hold this burning flesh. We thought, well, they're not going to get away with not hearing us this way. And they're going to see it, they're going to feel it, they're going to smell it.
What did you want them to think?
We wanted them to understand what we were saying, which was that there's something wrong with our current energy policies, which they represent. These are the foot soldiers of North American energy policy. And we wanted them to understand viscerally, this is taking us to destruction.
Is it true that Exxon closed down your website after this?
They did. In fact, they merely maybe made a call. We don't really know. They just called the upstream provider from our ISP, and they immediately shut it down. They shut down the site. They refused to turn it on unless we took any mention of Exxon off of our website.
The site that they took down was called vivolium.com, and at the top of it, it had the Exxon logo, and underneath it said 150,000 people are already dying from climate change every year. What a resource. And it had a link to the World Health Organization report about that. Exxon made a threat to the internet service provider saying this is trademark infringement or copyright infringement, and I think in court to support that they'd have to argue that this was credible. So
credible?
Well, that Exxon would actually have a site like this.
Under copyright law, the idea is that, you know, as long as you you can be determined to be making parody if a reasonable person does not believe that it's true. Like, for instance, with the Jonathan Swift thing, you'd say, well, would a reasonable person really think that he's saying that people should eat babies? And, you know, if it was determined in court that a reasonable person could be fooled, then maybe it's not, you know, parody or satire.
But, you know, you look at it, you can understand why a company, a corporation like Exxon wouldn't want an impersonator to defile their trademark, right?
Well, fortunately in this country, freedoms are still allowed to private citizens to make political statements, and it's not a right that is only given to large corporations.
Are you concerned about the ethical implications of what you are doing, of fooling people, or of making fools of people?
We're much more concerned with the ethical implications of not doing it.
What do you mean?
What I mean is that it seems like it's incumbent upon us to try to do something about the really grave ethics issues in the world, the real problems. Companies that will go and exploit resources that we know are going to, in the long run, kill us or many people around the world. These kinds of wrongdoings are at such a scale, they're so vast compared to our white lies, let's say, that we think it's ethical. Our path is actually the ethical one.
I mean, you would not get away with this in Putin's Russia, or in Mugabe's Zimbabwe, or in China today.
Or maybe even in France. I'm not entirely kidding. I mean, we do have really good free speech laws here. Unfortunately, they're kind of circumvented by other kind of loopholes. You know, you can speak at the volume of however much money you have, but you know, we are lucky to actually be able to do these sorts of things here, although we've also done it in Europe, because we do engage in this as a form of protected speech. It is satire, it is parody. It's a way for us to speak sort of beyond the volume that we normally would be able to.
In the real world, the yes men are ardent cyclists doing their best to reduce carbon emissions. Here they are, arriving in our studios in New York before changing into their disguises as serious media moguls. In their day jobs, they are engaged in corrupting the young. Mike teaches art and technology at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in upstate New York. And this fall, Andy begins teaching design and technology at the Parsons School of Design here in the city. Their shared passion is media literacy, helping students figure out who's telling the truth. Jon Stewart sat right there and said it's amazing to him that fake news gets more attention than real news. What does that say to you?
It's sad.
Yeah.
It's a sad state of affairs.
But we're not making fake news. We're making real news through fakery that's real fake news. It's like the known unknowns of Rumsfeld. We're doing that kind of a thing.
We actually see this as a form of journalism, or perhaps more precisely as a form of collaboration with journalists. A lot of the issues that we address journalists want to cover, and sometimes it's the reason that they've gone into journalism. But in many jobs, in many situations, editorial control won't let them unless there's a good little hook behind it. And so we've found a way to create funny spectacles that give journalists the excuse to cover issues. And sometimes they work really well.
Sometimes when I read what you've done and I look at your website, I think these guys are revolutionaries. Are you trying to overthrow the system?
We're trying to make the system more humane.
I mean, the system that we've got has got a lot of problems. So there may be a better system out there. Our goal is to show what's wrong with the system in ways that we enjoy, that are fun and strange and entertaining. We're working on creating ideas for what a different system could look like, or tweaks to the current system to make it better for people.
Mike Bonanno, Andy Bickelbaum, thanks for putting us on. Thanks for being here. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for putting us on as well.
Oh, yeah, here. Yeah, there you go. You can just take... Great. Yeah, that would be fantastic.